New York Fashion Week has just ended, and it was a truly exciting week of shows. And I think right before Fashion Week and throughout, there were a lot of conversations about whether or not New York Fashion Week was something that we still needed and whether or not it was dying. And I think after going to the shows and speaking to designers and really just speaking to my peers, like, I believe that New York Fashion Week is something that is still absolutely necessary. There's so much talent here, and I don't think as an industry we've always paid attention. I think there needs to be a lot more support around emerging designers, especially when it comes to New York Fashion Week and what can we do to make sure that new talent is on the calendars. I think we need to step away from this idea of just selling clothes. I think where other fashion weeks have been able to excel has been their ability to put creativity first. More value needs to be placed on how we as Americans view New York Fashion Week. I think for Tom Ford to put on a less than spectacular show in LA when you're the president of the CFDA, it doesn't make any sense, and I think it sends the wrong message to other designers. I think it says maybe New York Fashion Week isn't that important. And I think for someone like Emily Bode, I love her and I think she's a great talent whose clothes are made here in New York, but she opted to show in Paris. And when you have designers, you have fresh new talent like that, and they're not even opting to show in their own cities, that says something. It says that as an industry, we need to do better. But there are young designers showing here, and there are designers who have been here who have continued to show us that New York Fashion Week is important. You have Fee Noel, which is very new to the New York. This was her first time on the New York Fashion Week calendar, and that excites me because she's a Black designer from Grenadian descent from Brooklyn, and she completely is inspired by her heritage, and you can see that through her fashion and through her designs. There were these beautiful printed pieces that were done with so much care and intent that it forced you to pay attention. It forced you to acknowledge that she had a space, she deserved her space on a calendar. One of my favorite shows was Christopher John Rogers, who is a new designer on a Fashion Week calendar. And I think his show was brilliant. I think there was such great tailoring throughout the collection. I think he used color and texture beautifully. His collaboration with Christian Louboutin was smart. I think when you're designing for women, you're designing for them to feel empowered. And I think the Christian Louboutin shoe, the red bottom, for so many women, that signifies independence. It signifies power. And I think specifically Black women. And I think as a Black designer, for him to have done that, it speaks volumes to where we're going as an industry, where Black women and Black things and things that Black people like can be represented through fashion and through a designer that's getting the praises he's due. I think he's definitely a designer we should be watching, and we should look forward to seeing continuously on the New York Fashion Week calendar. I think Brendan Maxwell, he's another young designer that I think we should be paying attention to. His Fall/Winter 2020 collection, for me, was the perfect balance of being aspirational, but also being accessible. And I think for American women, and women outside of America, there's so many brands that are either one or the other. But to have that balance, I think it definitely opens you up to a broader consumer base. And I think for any new upcoming designer, that's important. You have to be able to sell clothes. And I know I say that a lot, but we're not gonna be able to have these brands if they cannot sustain themselves. And not to speak for Brandon, but I think he sees himself as the next great American sportswear designer. And I can look on his runway and I could absolutely see that for him. I can see updated modern takes on Ralph Lauren classics. I can see Donna Karan separates. Like, these are all things that make a brand. And I definitely do think he sells a lifestyle. And I think you can make the comparison because of that to Donna Karan, to Ralph Lauren, because it's this ability to live in people's homes and in people's minds beyond clothes. And I think Brandon has the ability to do that. I think when it comes to sustainable fashion, Sies, Marjan, and Gabriella Hearst were excellent. I think a lot of the time when brands try to be sustainable, they sacrifice style, or when they try to be green, there's this sacrifice of fashion. And I think with Gabriella Hearst, she was able to create really beautiful garments through upcycling fabrics like cashmere and upcycling fabrics from previous collections that are still very luxe and still very who she is as a brand, but still very familiar to the Gabriella Hearst customer. And I think with Sies using really interesting techniques to create prints and textures, you give people a little bit more to work with versus like, hey, this is sustainable because this really random thing. But here she is like, hey, these are artisanal jackets made by hand. And it's like, you can buy into that. I love that about both of those designers. And I think we are making great strides in sustainable fashion, but it's very hard when the industry itself is not sustainable. And though sustainability is obviously important, there were also designers who just gave us really great fashion, and you could appreciate that also. Prabal Gurung was one of my favorite shows of the season, and I think he's always been the underdog of New York Fashion Week. I don't think he's often credited for all the work that he does. I felt like his fall/winter 2020 collection, which was an ode to New York, but also had this restrained glamour of old Hollywood. And I think between him and Marc Jacobs, it felt like, and even Christopher John Rogers, it felt like a call to action to a time where we were getting dressed up and we were going out, and there was this elegance just in the air, and people lived. And I think we're also going back to that, to a time where people could live in these clothes and people wanted to be in them, and it didn't feel like they were putting on costumes, but to feel like you're just putting on a beautiful garment and going outside. Like, those are the days that I long for. Those are the moments that I wish I could see very often, and I don't. And I think New York City, that's the place where I would love to walk outside and just see beautiful clothes. And for Marc Jacobs, I think Marc Jacobs is a designer who has always moved fashion. So when I saw his show, I knew there was going to be a culture shift. I knew his show would mark a change in fashion. And like I said earlier, Marc has always been a designer who has moved fashion in a direction that was necessary. And to see this very polite take on the woman of today, who was free of embellishments, she was free of loud prints, she was free of just extraness, she was just so understated and regal. And I thought of like Jackie O, and these were the most significant times in fashion. And for Marc to be able to recreate them in a way that felt so modern and so timely, it speaks to who he is as a designer, and it speaks to who he is as one of the greatest American designers. And I don't think Marc gets credit for that. I don't think Marc has always gotten his flowers when it came to New York Fashion Week, because every fashion week he puts on a show that, whether we get it then or maybe 2 years later, his show marked a change in fashion, and not many designers can do that. Not many designers have ever done that. And he continues to do that. So when I'm talking to my peers and I say, I think Marc Jacobs is the greatest American designer, I was just so impressed with the level of restraint he showed and the level of fashion we got. And with all this bad press, I think it really gave people the opportunity and the want to pay attention to the clothes, to pay attention to the fashion, and to kind of let go of this idea of a show. It's like we needed to pay attention to the things that were coming down a runway because those were the things that mattered. And so when someone asks, is New York Fashion Week dead? Is New York Fashion Week dying? The answer is no. The answer will always be no. And I think for me, New York Fashion Week taught us that we need to get dressed up. And we still need to get dressed up. And I think it taught designers that you need to create something that people actually want.